Imagine waking up one morning to find that the financial gravity holding half the world together has simply turned off. In a single weekend, $120 billion vanishes from the markets. The world's supposedly safest luxury havens are dodging debris from the sky, and the ocean's most critical artery is suddenly choked with naval mines and kamikaze drones. It sounds like a dystopian thriller, doesn't it? But this is exactly what is unfolding right now. We are watching the transition from a localized military operation into a global economic earthquake.
It truly is a staggering shift. We have moved from the sheer kinetic force of what was called Operation Epic Fury into a highly volatile new phase dubbed Project Freedom. But underneath that optimistic title lies a terrifying reality. We are looking at a scenario where the structural support beams of the entire Islamic world, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates are cracking simultaneously. And the shockwaves? They are heading straight for the global supply chain, your local gas pump, and the grocery store shelves.
Exactly. I want to unpack this massive intelligence picture today, blending the raw military tactics on the water with the devastating macroeconomic fallout. Let's start with the military reality in the Strait of Hormuz. We just saw two U.S. Navy destroyers, the USS Truxtun and the USS Mason, literally fight their way through a gauntlet of drones, missiles, and fast attack boats just to extract two commercial vessels. If we apply a MOST analysis here, looking at the mission, objectives, strategy, and tactics, how is the US actually trying to control this chaos?
The MOST framework is the perfect lens for this. The mission is clear: guarantee freedom of navigation and break the blockade. The objective is to establish a secure, heavily monitored corridor, a red, white, and blue dome, if you will, over the strait. To achieve this, the strategy relies on a layered, defensive overwatch combined with physical escort teams. But the tactics are where it gets incredibly intense. You have Arleigh Burke-class destroyers acting as floating fortresses using Aegis combat systems to swat down ballistic missiles. For the closer threats, the Navy is vectoring in A-10 Warthogs and Apache helicopters to shred swarms of speedboats. It is a highly sophisticated, multi-domain defense.
It is like bringing a robotic sledgehammer to a mosquito fight, but those mosquitoes are deadly. Which brings us to a SWOT analysis of this entire theater. The strengths of the US military are obvious: unparalleled technological supremacy, electronic warfare, and robotic minesweepers like the knifefish that can hunt explosives without risking human lives. But the weaknesses and threats seem to be heavily intertwined here. The US is operating in a narrow 21-mile-wide choke point. That is a massive geographical weakness.
Precisely. And Iran is exploiting that weakness perfectly. Looking at the threats in our SWOT analysis, Iran doesn't need a billion-dollar destroyer to cause havoc. They are using asymmetric warfare. They have heavily fortified islands like Keshman Larak acting as unsinkable aircraft carriers, launching cheap, loitering munitions and dropping contact mines from rusted-out boats. The opportunity for the US and its allies is to economically strangle the regime until it collapses or begs for a deal. But the overwhelming threat is that this asymmetric harassment is incredibly cheap for them, while intercepting it costs the US millions of dollars per missile. It forces us to ask a deeply philosophical question. How long can a superpower fight a war of attrition against an enemy that measures victory not by winning, but simply by not dying?
That is a chilling thought. It is the ultimate cost-benefit trap. And speaking of costs, let's pivot to the broader geopolitical and economic disaster unfolding, because this is where the pestle analysis, political, economic, social, technological, legal, and environmental factors really paints a grim picture. Politically, we are in a bizarre gray zone. There are talks of ceasefires, yet missiles are still flying. But the economic and environmental pillars are where the true catastrophe is happening.
The economic devastation cannot be overstated. For 2 decades, the Gulf states sold the world an illusion of invincibility. That illusion is gone. Let's look at Qatar. They built their entire identity on being the irreplaceable supplier of liquefied natural gas. Then, drone strikes hit their industrial cities. They lost 17% of their export capacity for the next 5 years. That is a $20 billion a year hole. Suddenly, they have to declare force majeure on contracts with Europe and Asia.
And Saudi Arabia's backup plan completely failed, didn't it? They built the massive east-west pipeline to bypass the Strait of Hormuz, essentially their insurance policy against exactly this scenario. And it got hit right in the middle of a supposed ceasefire.
Exactly. The pipeline was running at full capacity, 7 million barrels a day, and a targeted strike took out a pumping station, instantly cutting output. It proved that no infrastructure is safe. And then you have Dubai. Dubai doesn't sell oil, it sells safety. It is the tax-free exit door for the global elite. When hundreds of drones and missiles started raining down and flights were grounded, that psychological contract of safety was torn to shreds. Real estate sales plummeted and hotel bookings cratered. The economic fallout across these three nations is monumental.
Which leads us directly into the sphere analysis, the social, political, economic, and religious or cultural impacts. Specifically, how this affects the broader Muslim world. Because the Gulf isn't just a playground for the rich. It is the financial anchor for hundreds of millions of people.
That is the tragedy that the mainstream headlines are missing. The Gulf is the piggy bank for the entire region. Think about the social and economic ripple effects. Saudi Arabia and the Emirates pay out tens of billions in remittances every year to workers from Pakistan, Egypt, Bangladesh, and beyond. When construction stops and expats flee, those remittances dry up instantly. Families thousands of miles away suddenly cannot pay for food or rent.
And the food and water security issues are terrifying. We are talking about an environment where 70% of the food consumed by the Gulf comes through that very strait.
Yes, and it goes beyond imported grain. Look at the environmental and technological vulnerabilities. These countries rely on desalination plants for up to 99% of their drinking water. Those plants require massive amounts of energy and are sitting ducks for drone strikes. If a major desalination plant goes offline, you don't just have a financial crisis, you have a humanitarian catastrophe within 48 hours. The Gulf states are suddenly forced to hoard their capital to rebuild their own infrastructure and boost their own defense, which means the bailout money that usually flows to struggling neighbors like Lebanon or Egypt is gone.
It is a terrifying domino effect. The inflation shock from spiked energy prices crushes the importing nations. Their currencies slide, and the traditional Gulf safety net is nowhere to be found. It really forces you to look at the fragility of our highly globalized system. We build these towering economies on the assumption that a 21-mile stretch of water will always remain peaceful.
It is the ultimate hubris of modern civilization. We assume that capital and technology can insulate us from raw, historical conflict. But, as we are seeing with the A-10s firing, depleted uranium rounds at speedboats, and robotic submarines hunting mines in the dark, the primitive realities of geography and ideology still rule the world. The U.S. might be able to escort a few ships at a time, but they cannot escort an entire global economy.
That is such a profound way to look at it. We are treating the symptoms with destroyers and helicopters, but the underlying disease is a fractured geopolitical order. So, where does this leave us? The US is caught in a strategic limbo, demanding behavioral changes that essentially require a regime change, but trying to achieve it through blockades and paused ceasefires.
It leaves us holding our breath. The immediate future hinges on whether the U.S. blockade can actually break the regime's will before the economic contagion collapses the economies of half a dozen allied nations. The Gulf states have the sovereign wealth to survive the immediate hits, but the longer this drags on, the more the foundational myth of Middle Eastern stability rots away. We are watching the rewriting of the global energy map in real time.
A trillion-dollar illusion shattered by cheap drones and stubborn geography. It makes you wonder, even if the strait fully reopens tomorrow, will the world ever truly trust that route or those markets again? The scar tissue from this conflict is going to alter global trade for a generation. Thank you for walking us through this incredibly complex landscape today. To everyone listening, keep your eyes on the water, because the ripples from Hormuz are already crashing on all our shores.